When a crime is committed, the perpetrator inevitably leaves behind something, a description, DNA, or physical evidence. This is the criminal's print on the scene. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast, episode 19.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast. This is Zach.
And this is your co-host, Jaron.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you. Today, we're going to talk about the disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. And Jodi was born on June 5th, 1968. She was 5 foot 4 inches tall and 120 pounds. Jodi had blonde hair and brown eyes, and she was born in Long Prairie, Minnesota.
Her father was Maurice Huisentruit, and mother was Imogene Huisentruit, and she went by Jane. She was very close to her father, Maurice. She had two sisters, Joanne and Jill. Jodi was the youngest. She attended Long Prairie High School and graduated in 1986.
Jodi was a great athlete. She actually played basketball and golf, and she was a phenomenal golfer. She helped her team win the state Class A tournament in 1985 and 1986. And on an interesting note, as a senior, she posted the third lowest score at the West Coast Conference tournament. And this helped her team lead them to state, which they went on and they won state. Jodi was described by her family as a bubbly, vivacious, and friendly person. Jodi believed in living each day to the fullest, and her favorite phrase to use was, "I love life."
After high school, she attended St. Cloud State University, which is in St. Cloud, Minnesota. She really loved to ski, and she also started water skiing and enjoyed that quite a bit. She had a lot of friends. One of the friends, Kelly Boyle, described Jodi as kind, loving, thoughtful, and someone who cares so much about her friends and family. Jodi was very focused and goal-oriented. In fact, she went by the nickname Focus. Her sister Joanne said, "She had a bright future, and we were looking forward to her reaching her goals. She was a hard worker."
Jodi always wanted to be famous. This was always a goal of hers. And while attending St. Cloud State University, she studied mass communications and speech communications. She graduated in 1990 with a bachelor's degree. Jodi's first job after college was a flight attendant for Northwest Airlines. After this, she changed her career path. So Jodi got her first broadcasting job for CBS 2 or Fox 28 as the Iowa City Bureau Chief at KGAN. And she worked at KGAN from February of 1991 to April of 1992. Then she moved back to Minnesota and worked at KSAX in Alexandria.
She was a reporter and a morning anchor, and she worked there until November of 1993. She then returned to Iowa, Mason City, and worked as a producer and an anchor morning and noon for KIMT. The day before her disappearance was June 26, 1995, and Jodi got home around 9 p.m. She had been at a golf tournament at the Mason City Country Club. The golf tournament was cut short at about 8 p.m. because of rain. So after visiting with some friends at the golf club, she told them, "Hey, I got to get up early in the morning. I'm going to go home." And she left. But instead of going home, she, it appears, went to her friend's house, John VanSickle. According to John, they watched a videotape of her birthday party. We're going to talk a little bit more about John VanSickle coming up.
So Jodi got home around 9 p.m. and she called a friend in Mississippi. And her friend wasn't home, but she talked to her friend's husband on the phone. So her friend's husband said that everything sounded fine, that Jodi was her typical self, cheerful and happy. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about June 27th, 1995. And this is where the nightmare starts. It was a Tuesday. It was a rainy and a foggy day. And Jodi would typically leave for work around 3 a.m.
But this morning at 3:45 a.m., her producer, Amy, calls her and woke her up. She had slept in. Jodi tells her producer She'll be right into work. Of course, at this point, she's actually late. So the producer, Amy, calls at 5 a.m., and her calls are going unanswered.
And this did happen, not a lot, but it certainly did happen at times that she would sleep in, and so Amy would call and wake her up when needed. So it wasn't like this was the first time this happened.
So between these two calls, the one being at 3:45 and the other at 5 a.m., neighbors heard a scream, but none of them called the police.
Nearby neighbor, Randy Linderman, was driving to work around 4:30, and he noticed a light-colored van in the parking lot. And this van caught his attention because the parking lights were on. So initially he slowed down, thinking, oh crap, it could be a cop. So 6 o'clock rolls around, and Jodi is not there to do the show, which, even though she was late quite often, she was always there at some point to do the show. So producer Amy fills in for her on the morning show, and calls are made to the police at 7:13 a.m. Because she wasn't there, co-workers of Jodi became concerned and called the police and asked them to do a welfare check at her apartment.
So when the police arrived, they knocked on the door and they got no answer. So they went to the parking lot and they found her red Mazda Miata that she'd only owned for a few weeks. At the scene, they found her key that was bent in the car lock. There were signs of a struggle. Jodi definitely fought her attacker. And police found a pair of red dress shoes, her purse, a hairdryer, a bottle of hairspray, and 2 earrings on the ground.
There were also drag marks on the pavement. Now keep in mind it had been raining. Most likely, Jodi was abducted from behind and drugged to another vehicle after she was injured. I would say it's logical that most likely she dropped her purse in order to fight the attacker and put up the best fight she could. Jaron, do you think the key that was bent because she was trying to hold on to the key and hold on to something as she was grabbed?
Yeah, I think she most likely had it in the lock cylinder, and when they pulled her, it just bent it to the side or whatever, and that is your most likely reason that would bend.
So this all happened at the Key Apartments at 600 North Kentucky Avenue in Mason City, Iowa. Now, when police got there and investigated, one interesting note is they did recover a partial palm print from Jodi's car.
So Jodi's producer, Amy, later explained that shift schedule was 3 a.m. to 12:30 or 1 p.m. She said, quote, she was supposed to be in no later than 3 a.m. She was often late. About once a week I would call her and wake her up, and she'd be into work within 20 minutes. If she wasn't there by 3:30 or 4, I'll give her a call and say, hey, are you awake? I knew something was wrong about 6 a.m. I didn't call police. I had the next person who came into work call the police. I waited because I thought she had just fallen back asleep. At the very worst, maybe she fell and hit her head in the shower, and honestly, I was busy doing the work of 2 people.
So we're going to talk about her sister Joanne a little bit, and we will get into this much more later, but she'd had an incident previously where she had got shook up, and Joanne said that she got shook up one day when she was out hiking or jogging on a trail, and a black truck had followed her. Chief Jack Schlipper said in 1995, we did find out that Jodi made a police report of an incident that occurred when she was out jogging. When asked when this report was made, Jack said, I believe that was October of 1994. Now keep in mind, he was asked these questions on June 29th of 1995, but it does show that Jodi might have had a stalker. Another interesting note is the night before at the golf tournament, Jodi had mentioned to a couple other of the golfers that she'd been getting some prank calls at home.
It was so bad, in fact, that her sister Joanne said that some people at the golf tournament mentioned that she was going to have to change her phone number or do something about it or go to the police. Along with searching the crime scene, officers searched the park next to the apartment complex. This is still on June 27th. So they searched the park, but they also searched Winnebago River and of course Jodi's apartment.
So June 28th, the next day, going back to the Mason City police chief at the time, Jack, he said that foul play is expected, but few clues have been found. And also agents of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation and the FBI joined in the search. On July 1st, Jack said that the disappearance is being treated as an abduction.
And on July 2nd, investigators used helicopters to search Mason City and the area southwest of the city. On July 3rd, late in the day, ground and air search is called off. They say that they will continue interviews. Fast forward to August 3rd, Jack, again the police chief, said more ground and air searches yielded no results.
On August 12th, John Long, who was a special agent with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, said, quote, "It seems clear the culprit was watching Huisentruit and knew her behavior patterns," close quote.
Which takes us back to the idea that she possibly had a stalker that could be involved in this.
Certainly, and keep in mind, she was a TV anchor, so she was on TV every morning. So there's thousands of people that could have seen her and knew her simply from TV.
On September 23rd, Jodi's case appeared on America's Most Wanted, and it generated more than 60 tips. Unfortunately, none of them ended up working out.
On December 9th, a search of 2 Mason City area dams turned up nothing. So forward ahead a little bit, but on February 18th, 1996, Jodi's case was featured on the one and only Unsolved Mysteries.
That got 186 calls and 97 tips, but that didn't lead anywhere either. But being on now America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, it was getting attention, which is really important in a case like this to help find evidence and to help find people involved. About 100 volunteers joined in the search that was organized by Jodi's cousin. This began on May 4th. Volunteers made t-shirts, bumper stickers, and buttons of Jodi. The volunteers also placed ribbons in their yards as a sign of hope, and they placed missing posters around the city. They also went around and placed flags on anything that appeared suspicious in the northwest Cerro Gordo County countryside. And on May 5th, police actually went around and checked the areas of the flags, but they didn't find anything.
So Sonny Ono, not to be confused with the woman that broke up the Beatles, a Mason City martial arts instructor, said that Jodi had attended a class he taught. And according to Sonny, he said that Jodi told him that she'd had an incident a few months back that she wasn't comfortable with. In September 1995, the Huisentruit family hired private investigators, and 2 of these PIs were Doug Jassa and Patrick McCarthy. So despite everybody's best efforts, in 2001, Jodi was legally declared dead, and that was in May of 2001.
So this is where some things get really interesting. Jodi's journal leaked in June of 2008. 84 pages of the journal leaked, in fact, to the Mason City Globe Gazette. They received a large envelope, no return address, and it was postmarked June 4th from Waterloo, Iowa.
And these are what some of the entries said. For example, April 1995, quote, "My number one goal is to get a new job," close quote.
Seems like a good goal. A lot of us can relate to that.
Certainly, and we know that she was career motivated and oriented, and she wanted to move up. So 2 days before she disappeared, on June 25th, she said, quote, "Great friends, but professionally, I'm fed up. It's difficult finding a new job, and I'm confused about what agents and what to do," close quote. She also said, "I love news. Improve my career, make more money, communicate, have more impact on a larger audience, get the Huisentruit name out, make mom proud."
But she was also aware that she needed a little more experience. She wrote, "I need to give myself 5 years in business, and I'm not where I want to be." The original journal was verified to be in law enforcement possession, so police tracked down the former police chief's wife, who was sending copies. When the police chief left office, he took a copy of the journal home with him. We don't know what the motive was of releasing these, but we do know that that's where the leak was coming from. The last 3 entries in the journal mention a guy that we've already talked a little bit about, John VanSickle, and we're going to talk about a few more things and then talk about him quite a bit more.
So in 2018, 4 billboards with a picture of Jodi were put up, and they said, quote, "Somebody knows something. Is it you?" Close quote. And her case has received a lot of attention, not only from the beginning, but also throughout the years. On February 23rd, 2011, and on December 6th, 2013, Jodi's case was featured on Nancy Grace, America's Missing. So lots of shows have been helping and keeping Jodi's case in the spotlight.
Which again, with a case like this, is just of the utmost importance.
So Jaron, now let's talk a little bit about the infamous John VanSickle. John was friends with Jodi, and he was 22 years older than Jodi. Just 2 weeks before, on June 10th, we had mentioned the birthday party. We knew that he threw this birthday party for Jodi. And according to John, he was the last person to see Jodi.
Which clearly makes him a preliminary suspect.
Yeah, and that's definitely not something, as he told the police, volunteered that information, probably not a smart thing to do, even if you're really not guilty.
Although, according to John, he was the last person to see Jodi, he wasn't necessarily the last person to speak to her, because she did have phone calls with her producer, Amy, in that morning. So he had met Jodi when he moved back to Mason City from Iowa. He was her neighbor at the Key Apartments where Jodi lived. He ended up moving, but he was still only about 5 minutes away from her apartment.
Now, John described his relationship with Jodi as a father-daughter type relationship. Now, having said this, many people felt that John was romantically interested in Jodi. Now, having said this, they do not believe Jodi was romantically interested in John. It was just more of a friendship type relationship. And John adamantly denies that he was interested in any type of romantic relationship.
In a 1995 interview with CBS, John said, "I just loved watching her have fun. I tried to watch over her. I tried to check on her once in a while, see how she's getting along." But he said something else in this interview that sets off alarm bells for some people. He said, "If you ever go in her apartment and you see men's clothes, they're mine. If I had a shirt she liked, I'd wear it for a while and then I'd give it to her."
That does sound like a rather strange thing to say, especially for someone that's just a friend.
And another interesting side note about John is he actually named his boat after Jodi.
Could that be a sign that John was obsessed with Jodi? In 2004, police searched the basement of a home that John once lived in. And this did not lead to any substantial evidence that we're aware of, but police have been holding a lot of stuff close in this case. In 2017, March of 2017, Mason City Police issued a search warrant. And this was for GPS data for 2 vehicles owned by John VanSickle, a 1999 Honda Civic and a 2013 GMC 1500.
The current Mason City Police Chief, Jeff Brinkley, said, "The search warrant you are referring to is part of our ongoing investigation. And we do not have any public comment at this time about the content of the search warrant or the person named in it." In a 2018 interview, which aired on December 15th with the TV show 48 Hours, Jeff said about the warrant, "The search warrant was not as fruitful as we had hoped." He also said, "That piece didn't plan out like we had hoped." Well, I probably could have told you that. I guess the idea there was they were hoping he was driving back to the crime scene or maybe back to where she had been buried. But that really is a Hail Mary.
It certainly is. Now, things get interesting because of one of John's friends, LaDonna Woodford. And her and John would go walking on a daily basis. It was their routine. And according to LaDonna, she called John at 6 a.m. And keep in mind, there's no cell phone here. So she calls at home on the landline the morning that Jodi was abducted. And so he answered. She said he sounded tired. Everything was fine. So keep in mind that if this is true and he's there at 6, she's abducted at 4:30, that's only a 90-minute window.
And in this time, you'd have to abduct, either hurt, disable, tie up something, and hide her in that time. So you do have to wonder, is that enough time or is it not?
Now, he did live very close to her, and it was only a 5 minutes, but still, it's still a very tight schedule at best. So on the 48-hour show, Jim Axelwood asked LaDonna, "You felt when you called him that morning that he was up there sleeping?" And LaDonna answered, "Absolutely. We didn't have cell phones, so I knew he was home." Jim then asked, "As you walked through this neighborhood, did he seem anxious?" And LaDonna answered, "Didn't seem anxious. He seemed himself."
So with this information, police actually administered a polygraph test on John, which he passed. Even though he passed, he does remain a person of interest. So that leads you to, what do police have on him that they continue to investigate him despite this?
You know, that is a phenomenal question, and I don't know, because they've searched the basement, they've got search warrants for the cars. It sure seems like they have one big piece that they're holding close, because they are really focused on John VanSickle.
And to get a search warrant, you do have to have some probable cause. And the things that we know of, they really have none. So there has to be something we don't know of.
And another thought that comes to my mind is, if he was planning on doing something to Jodi, why wouldn't he have done it the night before? Why would he have waited until that next morning? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Because as you said, the night before, they were together and they watched the tape of her birthday party.
Exactly.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Tony Jackson, who is another person of interest in this case. So Tony is definitely a bad guy. He is a prisoner. He's convicted of multiple rapes in the 1990s. In fact, he raped 4 women in 18 days. And he lived only 2 blocks from Jodi's job, which was KIMT, the TV station in Mason City.
Tony had no alibi for Jodi's disappearance, and the alibis he would give changed multiple times. Originally, Tony said he didn't remember where he was at 4:30 on June 27th, 1995, when Jodi was abducted. And he also said he was on his way to marry his girlfriend. Interesting enough, we find out later that him and his girlfriend had just broke up a few days prior to this.
So they probably were not on the way to get married at that point.
And another fact is, if you look at a picture of Jodi and his girlfriend, holy cow, they look very much alike. So Tony also told a KIMT TV reporter that he worked until 6 or 7 that morning and never missed work or had weird days off. Now, it came out, it was proven that he was not at work that morning, that he had left work early the night before she was abducted, claiming he injured his ankle.
So he also said he had never met Jodi or saw her in public. And this is something else that we can pretty strongly say is probably a lie. A former friend of Tony's told KMSP, Minneapolis, the news station, that they had been playing basketball and Jackson invited him to the South Bridge Lounge for drinks. Jodi was a regular at this bar. Tony told him that. Side note, the bar now is out of business. He said that they walked in through the back door, saw Jodi sitting at the bar, and the friend said Jackson walked right up to Jodi and started talking to her. His friend didn't know why Tony wanted to seek her out that night. While attending North Iowa Community College, Jackson developed an interest in broadcasting, however.
So Tony actually held his own student talk show. So later, When he was asked about this, his friend or the source said that he figured he was just trying to get career advice from Jodi. Now, while in Minnesota State Penitentiary, where Toni is and should stay, Steve Ridge, a consultant, asked Toni about Jodi. Steve looked Toni in the eyes and asked, "Am I looking into the eyes of a killer?" Toni answered, "No, you are not." Steve then asked, "Did you abduct Jodi Huisentruit?" Toni responded, "No." Steve continued asking. He asked the tough questions to get those out there. "Do you know where the body is?" And Toni repeatedly denied any involvement in Jodi's case.
He then said he prays daily for Jodi and her family, which sounds like a load of crap to me. A former jailmate said Toni told him he abducted an anchorwoman and killed her. That seems more likely to me. The jailmate claims he wrote a rap song about it. He wrote it down and will never forget the lyrics.
And that's, quote, "She's a stiffin' around tiffin', in pillage of sillage, in a bylow, low below."
What a creep.
Yeah, that's definitely, if this is true, now consider the source, because this is a jailmate, somebody in prison. But if this is true, this is very damaging. Caroline Lowell, who's a journalist and a PI, private investigator, talked to the jailmate, and they investigated. They searched a farm in Tiffin, which is a town near Silo.
They brought in law enforcement and cadaver dogs, and really interesting thing, 2 of the 3 dogs got a positive hit in the area, which is a pretty good sign that something had been there. The boards that they found there were sent to a state crime lab, and that has led nowhere.
So on May 5th, 1999, a statement came out about Toni Jackson. And keep in mind, this is 1999, so this is quite some time ago now. But it said, quote, "After conducting a thorough investigation, which included interviews, crime laboratory analysis, record review, and polygraph examination, Toni Jackson is not considered at this time a viable suspect in the investigation."
So we have to assume that while he is definitely a creep, they must not have much on him. So let's talk now about the current status of the investigation.
I would say that the most current, at least that the public is aware of, is this 48 Hours episode that came out. During this interview of Jeff Brinkley, so Jim Axelrod from CBS News was interviewing Jeff, who again is a current police chief for Mason City. And Jeff said to Jim, quote, "We have never closed the case," close quote. And Jeff also said, "It's never been a cold case for us. It's been an active investigation since it happened," close quote. Jeff said, "I'm not ready to quit yet." So we know, Jaron, as we talked a little bit about earlier, that law enforcement is really trying to come to a conclusion in this case.
And Jeff did say that they have some DNA samples and that they have that palm print that we already knew about. When asked if Toni Jackson's still a person of interest, Jeff responded, "I'm not going to comment on that." That seems interesting to me because you would think that if he is not, the comment would be, "No, he is not." Jim asked Jeff, "Is John VanSickle still a person of interest?"
Jeff responded, "I can't comment on that." And keep in mind, it is an ongoing investigation, so they could not want to leak anything to the public. Their hands are tied on this. So about the search warrant on John's vehicles, Carolyn Lowe, the private investigator, said, quote, "We surmise that they must have been trying to see if he was leaving, going to visit some site that he might have buried Jodi," because he lived in a different state at the time. So they were looking to see if he was going back and checking a specific area.
So that's very much like we speculated earlier.
Certainly. We know from before that Jeff said, quote, "They didn't get any information that was useful," close quote. When asked why he won't share any specifics from the case, Jeff said,
"I don't want to let the cat out of the bag." Jeff was then asked, "Do you have something?" He answered, "Not completely. No, I don't think we do yet. But I think we are very close." Unfortunately, this is what you always hear from investigators that don't always have anything.
and this is really strange because do you have something? Not completely. No, I don't think we do yet, but I think we're very close. That sounds very contradicting to me.
And when asked about a time frame, like, is it days, weeks, years, Jeff said,
I don't think it's fast. So we do know that it's an ongoing, active investigation. Efforts are certainly being made. Since Jodi has gone missing, police and private investigators have conducted over 1,000 interviews. That is an impressive number.
that is a huge number. That's a lot of time and resources gone into it. Of course, there's been no big evidence that we know of come from these interviews.
So now let's get into evidence. We know they have the palm print of a suspect, but they need someone to compare it with.
We also know that they do have DNA, according to Jeff in 2018. There are some sources that say there was possibly hair recovered at the scene, possibly blood, but because we only talk about things we can confirm, we didn't talk about those. But it does make you think, yeah, it could have been.
With the ongoing investigation, police are certainly holding evidence back. It makes me wonder, what do they really have that we don't know about? But of course we know this is to help weed out false confessions, and when the real killer is found, to help prove it's them. So Jaron, do you think John VanSickle or Tony Jackson had anything to do with Jodi's disappearance?
Well, it's kind of tricky because it seems from the trajectory of the investigation that John VanSickle does. But it seems from Tony Jackson and his constantly changing alibi and lack of a consistent story, it's almost like he self-incriminates, but the police can't find anything on him.
And also with Tony, even though he's been convicted of rapes, he, that we know of, never murdered anybody. So this is kind of a different league. I mean, yes, it could certainly escalate quickly, but we are not aware of anybody that he actually murdered.
But it's fair to say that somebody seemed to be obsessed with her and stalking her, wouldn't you say?
I absolutely believe she was being stalked and somebody was obsessed, because we had the prior instances, the black truck while she was jogging. We have the phone calls that she was getting. I think that she certainly was being stalked. Jaron, do you think it came from somebody that saw her on TV that became obsessed with her? Was it possibly a friend?
Well, it does seem possible they would have seen her on TV, and if so, that's a really dark twist to, she wanted to be famous, she wanted to have that, and if that's something that helped lead to the end of her life, that's really sad. But I will say Tony Jackson does seem like the type of guy that would have seen her on TV, taken interest in that, because we know he was interested in broadcasting. Do you think it was somebody that knew Jodi, like from work or a friend, like John?
I'm personally not convinced John is responsible. By no means am I going to rule the man out, because there might be something we don't know. But I'm not 100% convinced John was responsible. And on a side note, John has a rare aggressive form of Alzheimer's. So we might never get this information that we need. But we do know that whoever was responsible for Jodi's crime, it sure seemed like they knew her work schedule, they stalked her, they knew when she was leaving for work, and they took advantage of this.
And the police seem to think that person was familiar with that as well. So if you have any tips or information, you can contact the Mason City Police Department, and their phone number is 641-421-3636. You can also go to www.findjodi.com. Tips can be anonymous. You can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-383-0088 of North Central Iowa. And remember, you can always contact 911.
So if you know anything, please give these tips. I would love to see justice for the Huisentruit family and I would love to see this awful human being that did this brought to justice. So that is episode 19, The Disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. Please tell your friends about us. If you would be so kind, please rate and review us on any app you listen to. Jaron, I'm sure you couldn't agree more. It's huge for the future growth of the podcast.
Yeah, it's hugely important. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review.
So thank you again for listening to us. Please check out our Facebook and our Twitter at Podcast Criminal. And everybody have an absolutely fantastic day.
And remember, keep your record clean and your prints off the scene.